and I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency Patrice Emery, Trovoada, Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of member states, in an international context marked by growing divisions, rising tensions, and diminishing trust, it is with a great sense of responsibility that I take the floor in this great assembly, as Prime Minister and Head of Government, representing the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe. I would like to honor the memory of the victims of the recent earthquake in Morocco and the floods in Libya. Allow me to take advantage of the 78th session of the General Debate to congratulate Ambassador Denis Francis on his election and to express our full support for him throughout his mandate. We also thank the outgoing President, Mr. Korosi, for his commitment in conducting the work of the previous session, particularly in face of the complexity created by new conflicts and the world of food crisis. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, the theme chosen for this session, Unleashing the Power of Gender Equality, which we applaud, is highly relevant at a time when humanity is going through the greatest of threats, reversing progress in human development and widening inequalities in our respective states. The Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, known as the Maputo Protocol, is celebrating its 20th anniversary. And we have to acknowledge that there is a huge deficit in terms of empowerment and equal opportunities, particularly with regard to women's participation in political decision-making bodies. However, we could also refer to the Istanbul Convention, which, despite being binding for the signatory states, has done little to translate the will of the Council of Europe into results. This issue, like others, is a global objective that requires the commitment of the international community, governments, organizations and civil society to create a fairer and more equitable world for all. Faced with the persistent and growing challenges that remain, particularly in terms of poverty, hunger, inequalities and environmental issues, beyond our speeches, we, the leaders of the various nations represented here, must question ourselves and recognize our failures to protect our planet and ensure shared prosperity by 2030. My country, a small island state that has enjoyed effective democracy for more than 30 years and is still developing, is one of the main victims of climate change, ecosystem degradation, and economic dependence. My country is experiencing a situation of real economic and financial urgency in the short term, well known to our main partners, while at the same time going through a complex process of transition to the middle stage of development and pursuing a policy adapted to its reality, respecting multicultural diversity and human rights. We have tried with some success to adapt the codes, recommendations and good attitudes aimed at achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but structural problems, asymmetries of all kinds and a lack of confidence in the democratic institutions on the part of our populations are increasing. We should not hesitate to point the finger at those responsible for climate disruption within the G20 or at the global economic governing bodies that continue to ignore our social and environmental objectives, notably by denying us access to financial resources in reasonable quantities and conditions. Even more worrying is the fact that we are witnessing an increasing polarization and fragmentation of the world and global governance, with its growing share of populism and nationalism. The digital technology society itself, which could have been the accelerator for the development of our countries and citizenship worldwide, is becoming a new source of inequality, concentration of wealth and domination. Inequality, lack of respect and lack of inclusion can only lead to even greater fractures and setbacks. Coup d'etat and attempts to overthrow the constitutional orders are becoming more and more frequent, while at the same time long-standing conflicts, such as those in Palestine and Cuba, persist, and those in Yemen, Syria, Sudan, and Libya follow the same path. Armed conflicts in violation of international law, whatever they may be, are also treated differently. Our condemnation of Russian invasion of Ukraine was clear and without hesitation, because we respect international law and the UN Charter. Unfortunately, refugees and the dead are not equal in rights and dignity in a world that calls itself civilized. Nowadays, it seems that only global pandemics are capable of uniting and mobilizing us. We are slow to react in order to impose peace in the face of the latent conflict in the Great Lakes region, while the list of deaths, displaced people and destruction of all kinds continues to grow, and international peace missions are showing their limits due to the lack of clear and effective commitments in favor of the populations who are the first victims. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it may be too late, but indifference and hypocrisy are unacceptable. Our problems as poor countries tend to become the problems of rich countries too. Demographic disparity, economic disparity, climate deregulation, loss of institutional trust, among others. And there is still hope of finding new impetus if we resolutely commit to reforming our institutions, starting with the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions, towards a reinvented and more supportive multilateralism. It is our duty as leaders to cultivate an art capable of articulating the hoped-for solutions that can enlighten so many human beings whose experience is nothing more than a journey of suffering and uncertainty. True leadership means finding the necessary compromises. It means having the ability to make peace and promote progress. Excellencies, as the saying goes, nature abhors a vacuum, and our rhetoric, our appeals at summit after summit, sounds empty. We are convinced that peaceful, equitable and sustainable societies with educated and trained young people in good health are in the general interest, and that we must therefore use common sense to avoid major and unpredictable disruptions, and we still have the technical, financial and human resources to reform the international political system. Rich countries have a responsibility, but ours cannot be excluded either. We reaffirm the firm commitment of the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe to actively collaborate with its regional and international partners in all initiatives aimed at eradicating all acts that are inhuman, degrading to human beings and the environment, and detrimental to humanist values and freedom. We firmly believe that our organization is the converging center of our causes and is the only entity whose role is to structure and systematize our common challenges and lead the harmonization of our world, respecting cultural differences, models and systems of government and economic choices. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Before concluding, I would like to say how particularly grateful my country is to our Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his tireless efforts to strengthen the role of the United Nations in promoting peace, democracy, and the protection of human life worldwide, as well as in the fight against poverty and climate change in all its forms. His determination challenges and compels us. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe for the statement just made.